The subject of your conference really is so near, so far. Do our stories reflect Indian reality? There is no such thing as Indian reality. There are Indian realities in multitude, in plural. There are many realities. Malabar Hill and Chanakyapuri are as much realities as Dharavi and a lot of other worse places. Where I think, and I'm not here to critique your work, I don't believe I'm competent to, but I'm here to share as a fellow writer, and where I think we're failing as writers, as reporters, as writers or in various forms of that discipline, where I think we're failing is in confronted with these multiple realities, we are not able to look at what happens at the intersections of those realities. The intersections of those realities is where the action is at. It's where things are happening. Whose stories do we choose to privilege? Whose stories do we try to tell? How much of a voice do we give the person whose story it is in telling of the story? We sometimes do spot, and I will say this, that for everything I'm saying, of course, there are great exceptions and noble exceptions, but I'm not here today to, put out a balance sheet or a mark sheet or a report card. I'm focusing on the dominant trends of what we call the media, of which we are all largely the same tribe. We sometimes do spot the symptoms of our new realities. We rarely look at the driving or determining forces behind those realities. We often cover our work in major events emanating from those realities. We seldom touch or look at the process culminating in those events. It's like whether it's the water crisis, which we look at today, or the floods, or the drought. I mean, for instance, there is so much drama in my head about the sinking of a bore well. A huge process is unleashed by the sinking of a bore well, particularly if it is in the Dalit Basti. Okay? Because it's going to be wrecked within 3 weeks. But it's another thing. If you look at how the drought was covered, and today the newspapers are pretty celebratory. The front page of the major newspaper says, it's really great, the lakes are now overflowing in Mumbai. Actually, there are no lakes in Mumbai, they all come from surrounding areas. We get the 24-hour water connection, and the people living in the Adivasi areas of Thane, from where the lake water comes, they don't have piped connections in their houses at all. Okay? And secondly, it's not a great thing that the lakes are overflowing, because the same factors that cause drought or perceived drought in summer causes floods later in the rains. Yeah. If you go to any one of the pilgrim towns, one of the big things in the last 20-30 years has been the promotion of religious tourism. Okay? If you go to the most religious towns consecrate the source of a river. Most of them, not all. So if you went, say, to Trimbak in Nashik, the Godavari emanates from there, which is now in floods. Through March, April, May, June, the Godavari was dry for the first time in 139 years in the source. Now it's in floods. How is that? How does that happen? What are the different realities that work into this? Every single square inch of Trimbak and many other pilgrim towns have been concretized, marbleized, okay, to promote religious tourism and facilities and hotels. Apart from the regular deforestation, environmental devastation that takes place around them, the towns have been fully concreted. The water coming down from the Brahmagiri mountain In the lean months, it has no place to collect. It has no place to collect. It has no place to channel and flow because everything has been built over. In the monsoon months, you're going to have a flood because the water does not have a normal channel or an outlet. The same factors are behind the floods. The same factors are behind the scarcity and drought. How do we deal with this? Look at the intersections of the realities here, and I come back to my larger point in a moment. In the holiest part of the Godavari, the most sacred spot of the Godavari, is a place called the Ramkunda. You get references to it in literature going back more than 1200 years. This is not only a place where people immerse the ashes of loved ones, but also where you have the Shani Snan, the sacred bath. The bathing ghat is right there. That's what Ramakunda is. Millennia old rock formations. Millennia old rock formations. So what did the Corporation of Nashik do? It destroyed the rock formation ghat and put marble and stone and concrete. Yeah, it rebuilt the ghat, sacred ghat, in marble and concrete, and the Ramkunda went dry. Okay? And part of the Kunda going dry was a terrible thing because centuries of immersed human remains were on the floor. Okay? Then they decided, this is Maharashtra, we are a very dynamic state, we know what to do, right? Men of action and all that stuff. So how did, they had to keep the Ramkunda covered at least to the point where you could have all this mess. Because 20 trucks took out human remains and there was still a vast, acres of it. So they had to fill the Ramkunda. This is a river. It's a river, the Godavari. So they tackled that problem in typically Maharashtra fashion. For 4 months, every day, they poured 90 tankers of water into a river. So we become the only society in the world that's pouring tanker water into a river. And so then I went there with my colleague and friend of many years, Jaideep Hardikar. And we wanted to see, okay, what's happening with the sacred bath now, with the Shani Snan? And there we were, and there was this gentleman, very devout, very, awed by the sacred spot and the sacred moment. And he went to the edge of the ghat and he bathed with a hose pipe from the tanker. So there were your pilgrims bathing in the sacred waters of a tanker. Similarly, the Krishna Kunda has, but coming back to this, we'll come back to that in a moment again, but it's far more challenging for writers. Reporting events is fairly an easy job. Anyone can do that. It's far more challenging to capture the process. It's far more challenging to look at the dynamic interplay of factors that create a crisis, that create or progress or retardation or whatever. Is there one large canvas against which we can say we need to look at these intersections of realities? I believe there is in the last 25 years, maybe 30 years, but I believe there is such a canvas. Inequality. You are the nation with the fastest growing inequality in the world. Okay. One thing that writers in India have no excuse, they have many excuses for dealing or not dealing with reality. And I will also say, though I said I'm not going to talk about the exceptions, one has to say this. What happens to those who actually challenge the intersections? Those who actually traverse the intersections? Between 1992 and last year, 28 journalists lost their lives in this country trying to cover those realities. It's very interesting and very instructive that all these were reporters, small town, small newspaper, Indian languages. Not a single journalist from a major corporate media outlet. All of them were, most of them were stringers or freelancers. Many of them were, all of them were small town based. Most of them were Indian language, wrote in Indian language publications with an exception of 2 or 3 who worked for Doordarshan and were killed in Kashmir. A very different zone and situation. We even deny these people their credibility and dignity. These are all racketeers. Were they really journalists? A journalist is only someone who has a bloody accreditation card to show that he can enter assembly and parliament. Okay? We deny them that dignity. But know this, that these people did try challenging the factors at the intersections. They tried telling the stories. Again, I say it's very significant that almost all of them are from the Indian languages. All of them are small town, because the mainstream media, if you want to call it that, we've been tamed. We've been tamed. Largely. There are, again, great exceptions. But the second great exception that I want to tell you about is last year, when the writers of this country stood up to what is, to my mind, absolutely the most undemocratic regime to have ruled this country, and returned their awards to us. This was a great, great development. Again, I want you to see, it's something very difficult for a small guy or small woman sitting in Odisha or Dharwad. They were abused. They were seen as part of a conspiracy. It's actually very difficult to do that. It called for enormous courage, and it called for a sense of sacrifice. My greatest achievement, I'm throwing it back because I want to show that I do not accept your gagging of writers. I had no such dilemma, I have to say, because I never accepted a government award in my life, and therefore did not have that horrible choice to make. But I admire and respect those who made it. So these major exceptions apart, let's get back to this thing of the fastest growing inequality with one more little excerpt from a situation like the Godavari, which is also a heartening story at the intersections. In May and June, my friend Jaideep Hardikar and I, we went back to the sources of 6 different rivers, Savitri, Venna, the Krishna, Godavari and others, to see why they were going dry. And broadly we found the same factors everywhere, the massive deforestation, but the extent of human agency in diversion of water resources. Water is the zone where your inequalities stand naked. Water is the area where your inequalities as a society stand naked. Anyway, the Krishna Kunda had also, the Krishna Mai temple at the source of the Krishna had also gone dry. But there was water in the Krishna Kunda. Now where was this coming from? Was it tanker? No. There was a small farm on the edge of the Krishna Mai temple whose dug well had gone completely dry, but there was still some water in their borewell. And they were giving their water to the Krishna Mai Kunda, to the Krishna Kunda, the tank of the Krishna temple. And these 2 little farmers, strawberry farmers, their names are Ismail Roshan Nalaband, Ismail Yunus Nalaband and Ismail Roshan Nalaband. Both Muslims, of course. And I asked Yunus Ismail Nalaband, यार आप मंदिर को क्यों पानी दे रहे हो? What does it have to do with you? He said, मेरी पानी है थोड़ी, सब ऊपर वाला का है ना. Again, as an unbeliever, I nonetheless was still very touched by that gesture. You have one thing that Indian writers cannot plead. You can make all sorts of excuses about threats, dangers. You cannot plead a lack of inspiration, ideas, and stories. This is a country where those kick you in the face. The choice is what to leave out. What is it that I cannot cover? What is it that I cannot fit in? You have there is no place on earth. Now, Vajpayee ji was saying that about the diversity, about the languages. If you're talking about rural India, you're talking about 833 million people speaking 780 living languages. After 225 languages have died in the last 50 years. Of those 780 languages, 6 that are spoken by more than 50 million, 3 that are spoken by more than 80 million, 1 that is spoken by more than 500 million, and several that are spoken by less than 200,000. 1 in Tripura spoken by only 7. There's incredible wealth of stories out there. Unbelievable diversity and stories. You know, it's a writer's paradise if you look at it in that way. But as I said, we're missing the large canvas, which is just about the data show. What data? There are 4 sources of data that I offer you, and I'm going to show you some of that inequality in practice, including the sacred Shani Snan at the Godavari Ghat. There are 4 sources from where we can compile data on inequality, on income inequality, for instance. Social inequality is another, it's a universe in itself. The Credit Suisse, it's a giant multinational bank that every year brings out a World Wealth Report, Wealth of the World Report, in which it gives you data which it uses from the governments of these countries. So NSS data, which is the National Sample Survey Organization of India, its data is there. So when we are talking about the Indian data, we are talking about Indian government data, official data. Third is the Forbes Billionaires list. My favorite website. I look there every March to see are there any names I know, and who knows, one day. India now has $93 billionaires. In 91, you did not have a single one. You did not have a single one. In 91, you did not have a single dollar billionaire. In 2015, 93. The extent of those 93 gentlemen, sorry girls, they're almost all men with 2 exceptions. I will tell you in a moment. And there is also the socio-economic caste census that came out in 2014, which of course doesn't give you any caste data yet because they're afraid to come out with it and face the consequences of putting that data on the table. And that data is seriously flawed. Of course it is. Because caste is so your society and your mechanisms and your institutions so reek of caste that it is very difficult to do a dispassionate study of it. It gets into your questionnaires, it gets into your questioner's mind. That's why you find in opinion polls how often the Dalit vote is wrongly called. How often Mayawati and the BSP are underestimated because the investigator didn't enter the Dalit basti. He can't do that. He has to have a bath otherwise, right? So, these four major sources of data put together tell us this. What is the extent of control of the top 1% over wealth in your country? 53% of all total household wealth in this country is owned by the top 1%, but 44% of that is owned by the top 0.2%. And if we look at it over a 15-year period, because Credit Suisse has the data going back to 15 years, they bring that report out every year. In no other nation of the world did inequality grow as rapidly as it did in India between 2000 and 2015. There are other countries where inequality is greater. Brazil, South Africa. But in none of them was the rate of growth of inequality as high as it was in India. The top 1% of Indians, in 2013, they owned 49% of all wealth. In 2015, that went up to 53%. Now, to give you a comparison, take the quintessential capitalist economy, the United States. The top 1% own 37%. And everybody agrees that the United States is more unequal than it ever was in its history. So what we are saying is, the top 0.2% of Indian population has greater control over its society's wealth than the top 1% of the American population ever did in the history of that nation. Those are the levels of inequality. Yeah. So our country stands fourth in the global list of billionaires, maybe third now. Occasionally, our competitors mainly are China and Russia and Germany, and every now and then we show the Germans their place. The Chinese and Russians have larger numbers of billionaires than us, but we don't take that too seriously because the Chinese billionaire is worth about $1 billion per capita. The Indian billionaire is worth 3.75 billion per billionaire. Okay, so never mind about the Chinese. The Russians matter even less. I mean, there are the moral issues involved, right? I mean, that's a country that every 5 years sends all its billionaires to prison. We send us to parliament. I'm serious that you can trace the inequality in that as well. In 2004, this country introduced election affidavits in which you stated your wealth. Your wealth was taken at your face value statement. Your statement was taken. You were not required, and even today are not required, to attach an income tax statement to it, to show that what you're saying is true. And given the incredible modesty involved, in 2004, 32% of all your members of parliament were crorepattis, rupee crorepattis. In 2009, we are just going by their own affidavits, by their own statement. In 2009, the 32% became 53%. In 2014 elections, 82% of all your members of parliament are crorepattis, and they are going to represent the poorest population on earth. There's your story. There are your stories. That intersection. Okay? Vijay Mallya was made a Rajya Sabha MP. Okay? Vijay Mallya is going to represent who? Well, we didn't send him to prison, not yet, and we sent him to Mayfair, London. Right? Unlike the Russians. I mean, that's what gives us the moral superiority over the Russians. But let's go further into how rich are the rich. If you look at it, the richest 100 Indians, never mind 0.2%, let's come to 0.000, how many ever zeros? 2%. The 100 richest Indians own more wealth than the bottom 69% of your population. That's not my numbers. Those are the Forbes. The wealth can be calculated from the 10.02%. a tenth of all wealth in this country is owned by 100 human beings. The bottom 69% own 9.92%. The 50 richest Indians, 15 Indians, 1-5, the 15 richest Indians own more wealth than the bottom 50% of your population. 15 Indians. At the world level, by the way, the equation is, according to Oxfam's analysis of Credit Suisse data, 62 individuals own the same amount of wealth as half the world's population of 3.5 billion. That is, half the population is 3.5 billion. So 62 individuals, the Bill Gates, the Warren Buffetts, they own more wealth than half the world's population. In India, it isn't 62, it's 15. 15 individuals own more wealth than 50% of your population. The ratio is those 15 own 4.62% of all the wealth, and the bottom 50% owns 4.1% of all the wealth. The single richest Indian, no prizes for the name, the single richest Indian owns more wealth than the bottom 20% of your population. Think about it. Now, to the extent that the media has ever looked at these people, it has been celebratory. The great achievements, the entrepreneurial stuff, all this kind of stuff. Yeah? The great success story. Just go back 10, 15 years and see how Vijay Mallya was celebrated, yeah, for his fantastic achievement and the dynamism he brought and everything else. You cannot sustain, no society can indefinitely sustain those levels of inequality. Okay? And those levels of inequality show in absolutely every sphere of life that you want to look at. Unprecedented levels of rural distress in the last 20 years, leading to more than 300,000 farmers taking their own lives. Vajpayee ji was saying that you have to think of others. Let me read you an excerpt from a very sad suicide note, less than 1 week old. Less than a week old. Yeah? This is a 22-year-old boy in Vidar who has killed himself. Gopal Babarao Rathod, suicide note, June 30th, 2016. He asks, in cricket teams, the sons of businessmen, in volleyball teams, the son of rich people can play. What about the sons of farmers? Because of the farmers' trials and struggles, people get food to eat. What about their sons? A teacher's child can easily afford the fee of 1 lakh rupees to become an engineer. But how will a farmer's child afford such a fee? When banks are approached for loans, they seek some property as a mortgage. Not always, but broadly. When banks are approached for loans, they seek some property as a mortgage. What about those who have no property? What about those who have no property? Salaried individuals get dearness allowances without asking for it. What about those farmers who are in dire need of compensation for their produce? I am responsible for my act. Do not misunderstand this to be a fashion. My message to the youth, and it echoes what you said, if we can't give happiness to others, at least let us not bring sorrow to others. People lead lives for themselves, but one must really lead one's life for others. It brings you much happiness. Sorry mother, sorry father, sorry brother and sister, I take my life. Okay. In the last decade, I've read dozens of these notes. Ramachandra Raut, what a story. when Ramchandra Raut of Vashim wrote in his note, you know, when you're a small person in a village in India, your life is a runaround for authenticity, to get the patta, to get this title deed, to get the Upakosh Tehsildar to sign on this, to get the court stamp on that. Poor Ramachandra Ratan Raut was so desperate to be taken seriously, and he lived in that struggle for authenticity. He writes a letter to the President and Prime Minister of India, and he writes it on 100 rupee revenue stamped paper, because he wanted it to be taken seriously. What a story there is in that. He wanted it to be taken seriously. The letter reads like a chapter from Dickens, about money lending, about usury, about extortion. There have been dozens of such notes. It's astonishing to me that we are not moved to the point of breakdown and tears. We are not moved to ask questions that they are asking. You know that there have been in Maharashtra 13 commissions on farmers' suicides. This is India. We will have as many commissions on a subject until the government gets a report that it wants. Yep. So, yet, you don't need them when the suicide notes of the farmers are telling you what the causes are. They're writing to you, they're telling you. And the most astonishing thing about the farmers' suicides in Maharashtra, nowhere else in the world am I aware of this. The suicide notes are not addressed to father and mother and loved ones. They're addressing their suicide notes to the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and the President of India. Okay? Meaning they recognize what we sitting here fail to recognize, that this is the outcome of policy-driven processes. The farmers who are taking their lives understand that they are victims of policy. Are we looking at policy? Are we looking at the decision one takes, which then destroys someone else? When the problems of water were on in Latur, in Aurangabad, there was anger in the newspapers, huge anger in the media, when the High Court and before the High Court, the government, and then the High Court said, IPL cannot be held because it takes too much water. There were editorials criticizing the High Court judgment for that. You know, it's absolutely outrageously selfish. Let me tell you that in the same Aurangabad, that poor woman who stands in the queue, and if she's a Dalit woman, even if she's first in the queue, she'll get her water last. She pays between 45 paisa and 1 liter for a bucket of water. Okay? Between 45 paisa and 1 rupee, for a liter of water, I'm sorry. For a liter of water, it can cost as low as 45 paisa and as high as 1 rupee. Do you know what 24 beer factories of Marathwada have been paying for the last 20 years? 4 paisa. And they take 3 million liters daily. These are your intersections of different realities. The realities of the elite, the realities of the poor. 3 million liters daily for beer. Just beer. These are just the beer factories. I'm not getting into the others. I'm not going into the soft drinks, guys. I'm not looking at the bottled water mafia. Yeah, just the beer factories get their water for 20 years now at 4 paisa per liter. And that's after a court battle, because earlier they were getting it at 1 paisa per liter. Where are the writers? Where are the reporters? Where are the intellectuals? Where are those script writers? Where are we looking and saying that this cannot sustain? You cannot run a society like this. You cannot. It's not just about the survival. Well, democracy itself is in danger, but I think even the basic fabric of your society is in danger in the face of these kind of injustices. Okay, most of your crisis, the water crisis, the employment crisis, the migrations crisis, these are driven by human agency and not natural calamity. We feel very happy covering natural calamity because we can show the anchor standing in a raincoat at Uttarakhand. Yeah? And you're happier covering natural calamity because you don't have to ask questions about who was responsible for this damage. You can blame it on nameless politicians instead of looking at the giant elephant in our room at the time, which is corporate power. Why are we unable to look at corporate power? We are unable to look at corporate power because we are owned by corporate power. The media is owned by corporate power. We are not, do you know that of those 15 Indians who own what 50% of the population does, at least 3 or 4 are significantly embedded in the media. We are unable to post-mortem, or not post-mortem, to dissect, to look at, to analyze our own complicity in what is happening in this country, which is the fastest rate of growth of inequality in the world. Why is that so? There is no autonomous institution called the media. The media are owned by corporations very largely. A single gentleman today is the largest media owner in the country, Mukesh Bhai Ambani. He owns more television channels than he can name. All your ETV, Marathi and all those, they're not owned by Ramoji Rao or Enadu. That was long ago. They're all owned by Mukesh Ambani, except for ETV Telugu. Except for Enadu TV Telugu. All the other ETV channels are owned by Mukesh Ambani. All the, a number of, as I said, he won't be able to name all the channels he owns. You could have, in such a situation, the CNN IBN being given a fatwa, you will not cover the Aam Aadmi Party. No Aam Aadmi Party was representative was called into a discussion for any kind of coverage in an election in which that party won 67 out of 70 seats. Yeah? But corporate power prevailed. It could say, you will not cover this. We do not cover it, and let's be honest, because we don't cover what is not revenue driven. Right? We don't cover something. When did you start covering Kabaddi? I love it. When did you start covering it? When a commercial enterprise. I am a cricket fanatic. And I find it disgusting. Look at how you're covering or not covering your test cricket, but how you cover your IPL. One of the owners of the IPL is a gentleman called Vijay Mallya. The other is Mukesh Ambani. These people got 24 crores in tax relief. Entertainment tax was waived for them in Maharashtra until a high court order said it has to be collected. When you waive the entertainment tax for IPL, you are declaring it an educational exercise. Okay? The cheerleaders and everything else that go with it. Yeah. So you are declaring that an educational exercise because that is the only ground on which you can waive entertainment tax. Yeah? That was waived for them, 24 crores worth of it. And the editorials were saying, you're driving IPL out of Mumbai, it brings money, it brings revenue. It took money, it took revenue. Okay? Look, if dealing with injustice as a subject has long been embedded in Indian cinema writing, it's not as if it's not been there. I think it is much less there in the last 20 years. Okay? It's not as if you have no expertise over it. You do plenty. Huge. You have a history of 100 years of writing on those things in film. But we don't want to get into it because it cuts too close to ourselves. Let's look, now we looked at the top 1%. Oh, before that. We'll look at the bottom 10%, but let me show you some slides. The kind of India that's unfolding around us. Do you know, 25 years ago, there was no such thing as a gated community in India. 25 years ago, Delhi was still a bunch of villages held together and subsidizing a central portion called Lutyens Delhi. By 93, when we changed our economic philosophy, by 1993, steel gates sprang up on every colony in Delhi. Every colony of the middle and upper middle classes, Chanakyapuri, Vasant Vihar. Everywhere you go, Delhi was a city of villages where people took their buffaloes through these areas. Now at night they're harassed by private security guards. These gates have actually privatized public spaces also. Look at the kind of communities that are coming up. By the way, do you know that India is one of the areas where gated communities are growing fastest? They're very proud of it. There is a company called gatedcommunities.com. I will show you some slides and what their claims are and what their photographs. We also have, right here in Amchi, Mumbai, plans unfolding for complexes which will have 150 to 210 swimming pools in one complex. Have a look at this, then we'll get back to the subject.